The morning it happened, I was standing in my own kitchen, still in my pajamas, holding a warm mug of coffee with both hands. The television was on in the background like always. I had the volume turned low, barely loud enough to hear over the hum of my old refrigerator. I wasn't really paying attention. I was thinking about what I needed to get done at work that week. Then the host's voice cut through the room. And here she is, the genius behind America's most talked about brunch dish, the honey butter sunrise biscuit. My mug tilted. Coffee sloshed over the edge and burned my fingers, but I didn't even flinch. Because the woman smiling at the camera wasn't a stranger. It was Monica Hale. My best friend. My co-worker of 3 years. The woman I had trusted with almost every recipe I ever developed. She sat on the studio couch like she owned it, wearing a cream-colored blouse and the soft, practiced smile I had seen 100 times in office meetings. The audience applauded. The host leaned forward with excitement. And Monica laughed, that gentle, modest laugh she used when she wanted people to think she wasn't even trying. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. That recipe was mine. Every single ingredient. Every careful adjustment I had made over 3 long years. Mine. And I was watching someone else claim it on national television. My name is Erin Calloway. I'm a product developer at a mid-sized food company called Golden Table Kitchens, based out of Columbus, Ohio. My job is to create recipes that eventually end up on grocery store shelves: biscuits, glazes, brunch kits, sauces. The kind of food people reach for on slow Sunday mornings when they want something warm and comforting without much effort. I had been doing this work for 8 years by the time Monica Hale came into my life. I wasn't famous. I wasn't the kind of person people noticed at parties or followed on social media. I was just good at what I did, careful, patient, and thorough in ways that don't always get attention but always get results. My manager, a tall, quiet man named Douglas Firth, once told me I was the engine behind the menu. He meant it as a compliment. But it also meant I was the one working late in the test kitchen while someone else got the credit in the company newsletter. That was just how things were. I had made peace with being behind the scenes. But the honey butter sunrise biscuit was supposed to change that. It was supposed to be my moment, the one time I stepped out of the background and let the world see what I had actually built. I never imagined someone would try to take that moment away from me. The biscuit started as a mistake. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon in January, about 3 years before the television broadcast. I was in the test kitchen at Golden Table Kitchens, working on a butter glaze for a new cornbread line. I was distracted, thinking about a supplier email I had forgotten to answer, and I grabbed the wrong bottle. Orange blossom honey instead of plain. The moment it hit the warm butter and the smell rose up from the pan, every single person in that kitchen stopped talking. One of the production assistants, a young guy named Perry, actually turned around and said, "What is that?" I didn't answer right away. I was already thinking. From that one mistake came 3 years of quiet, careful work. I experimented with the dough, different flour ratios, different resting times, different amounts of butter. I adjusted the honey glaze layer by layer until it was light enough not to overpower the biscuit but strong enough to be the first thing you tasted. I kept a notebook. Every test version was recorded, dated, measured, noted. By the time I considered the recipe finished, I had filled almost 60 pages. The biscuit tasted like warm sunlight. Like the best kind of Saturday morning. And it had taken me 3 full years to get it there. Monica Hale joined Golden Table Kitchens 3 years ago, right around the time I was deep in the biscuit development process. She was warm, funny, and immediately likable. The kind of person who remembered everyone's coffee order and always had something kind to say after a long meeting. She laughed easily and made you feel like you had known her for years within the first week. We became lunch partners quickly. Then we started texting outside of work. Then she became the person I called when something went wrong, or right, in the test kitchen. She was my person. And because she was my person, she tasted almost everything I created. Including the biscuit. I brought her early test versions to try. I asked her opinion. I trusted her feedback enough to adjust the recipe based on what she said. In fact, one of the most important improvements, adding a second honey layer on top of the glaze after baking, came directly from a suggestion she made about the texture. I thought we were building something together, in the way good friends sometimes do without even realizing it. I never thought she was studying the recipe. I never thought she was memorizing the ingredients, the steps, the story behind it. I never thought she saw it as something she could take. But she did. The National Morning Table Cooking Contest opened for submissions that spring, and my manager Douglas was the one who pushed me to enter. "Erin, this is your recipe," he told me one afternoon, leaning against the test kitchen doorway. "Something like this doesn't come along often. You should put it in front of people." The contest was organized by the producers of Morning America Kitchen, one of the biggest food television programs in the country. The winner's recipe would be featured live on their show, demonstrated in front of a national audience and then published in their annual cookbook. It was exactly the kind of recognition I had never been able to reach from behind the scenes. I spent 2 weeks polishing the submission. I wrote up the recipe clearly, with precise measurements and detailed steps. I included a short personal story about how the biscuit was born, the accidental orange blossom honey, the smell that stopped the kitchen, the 3 years of careful testing. The night before the deadline, Monica came over to my apartment. She sat at my kitchen table while I baked the final test batch. She ate 2 biscuits and told me it was the best thing I had ever made. "These are unbelievable," she said. I smiled and packed up my submission. I had no idea what she was planning. 3 weeks after I submitted my entry, an email from the contest organizers arrived in my inbox. I opened it right away, sitting at my desk at work, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. The message was short. "Dear Ms. Calloway, thank you for submitting your recipe to the National Morning Table Cooking Contest. After careful review, we regret to inform you that your submission was not selected for this round. We appreciate your participation and encourage you to try again in a future cycle." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and sat very still. I had been so sure about that recipe. So sure it was good enough. 3 years of work, 60 pages of notes, and it hadn't even made the first cut. I told Monica at lunch that day. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "The judges are idiots," she said firmly. "Seriously, Erin. That recipe is brilliant. Their loss." Her voice was warm. Convincing. Exactly what I needed to hear. So I believed her. I let myself feel a little better. I went home that evening, put my notebook back in the kitchen drawer, and told myself I would find another way to share the recipe someday. And then, 5 weeks later, I turned on the television. Back in my kitchen, I stood frozen as the television segment continued. The host was asking Monica to walk viewers through how she had come up with the biscuit. Monica tilted her head slightly and smiled. "Oh, it just sort of came to me one morning while I was experimenting," she said. "I grabbed the wrong bottle by accident, and the smell of the honey just stopped me. So I kept going." My hands started shaking. Those were my words. That was my story. Word for word. The accidental honey, the smell, the moment of surprise. I had told Monica that story more times than I could count, sitting in the test kitchen, standing at my apartment stove, laughing over lunch. She had taken all of it. Not just the recipe. Not just the ingredients and the steps. She had taken the memory. The accident. The meaning behind it. She had stolen the soul of the thing. And now she was smiling at a television camera and wearing it like it had always been hers. I set my mug down carefully on the counter so I wouldn't drop it. The anger came slowly at first, then all at once, rising up from somewhere deep in my chest like heat filling a room. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice Monica had made. A calculated, deliberate choice. And she had made it while looking me in the eye. My phone started buzzing before the segment even finished. Coworkers were texting me about the show. Some were excited, sharing clips. A few asked if I had seen it. One message simply said, "Monica is on Morning America Kitchen. Did you know about this?" I read every message without answering any of them. My first instinct was to call Monica right then and confront her. To let her know I had seen everything. To demand an explanation loud enough that she couldn't talk her way around it. But I stopped myself. I had worked in professional kitchens long enough to understand one thing: if I reacted emotionally, I would lose. Monica would look composed and credible. I would look like the jealous coworker who couldn't accept someone else's success. No one would believe me without proof, and even if they suspected the truth, sympathy alone doesn't win cases. I put my phone face down on the counter. I took a slow breath. Then I went to my bedroom, got dressed for work the same as I did every other morning, made sure my face gave nothing away, and picked up my bag. If Monica was waiting for me to fall apart, she was going to wait a long time. Because I had something she didn't. I had proof. And I was going to take my time building the case around it. When I walked into Golden Table Kitchens that morning, the office felt different. Someone had brought in a tray of cupcakes with small paper flags that read, "Congrats, Monica." A replay of the television interview was playing on a laptop in the break room. A small group of coworkers stood around it, watching and pointing and laughing at something the host had said. Monica was in the center of it all. She was laughing with Douglas, her cheeks flushed, her hands animated as she talked. She looked genuinely happy, the kind of happy that comes when you have wanted something for a long time and you have finally gotten it. Then she saw me walk in. Just for a second, her smile slipped. It was small, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't already watching for it. But I was watching. I had been watching from the moment I stepped through the door. She crossed the room and hugged me. "Erin. Can you believe it?" she whispered near my ear. I hugged her back. Warm. Easy. Like I had nothing to think about except being happy for her. "Unbelievable," I said. And I meant it. Because it was unbelievable, her ability to stand there, hug me, and look me in the eye after what she had done. Right then, I decided I was going to watch her very carefully from that moment on. That evening I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea, and I got to work. The first thing I did was open my recipe development folders. I kept everything organized by date. Every draft of every recipe I had ever created at Golden Table Kitchens lived in those folders, backed up in two separate places. The honey butter sunrise biscuit had its own folder. Inside it were 47 saved documents, each one dated, each one showing the version of the recipe at that specific point in development. The oldest file was timestamped 3 years and 2 months ago, 14 months before Monica had even joined the company. That alone was significant. But digital files can be questioned. People can argue about access and shared drives and editing timestamps. I knew I needed more than computer records to make an airtight case. I needed something physical. Something that existed outside of any system. I also began writing down every memory I had of sharing the recipe with Monica, every tasting session, every conversation, every moment she had given feedback. I wrote the date beside each one as accurately as I could remember, and I kept the list in a separate document. I was building something careful and deliberate. The truth was all there. It had always been there. I just needed to arrange it properly. The next morning, before I left for work, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept my old recipe notebook. It was flour-dusted and worn at the corners. The cover had a small orange stain near the spine from a glaze test that had gone wrong 18 months earlier. I opened it slowly, turning the pages one by one. Every version of the biscuit was in there, sketched measurements, crossed-out adjustments, arrows pointing to changes. Each entry was dated in my handwriting. And then I found the page I had been hoping to find. 6 months before the contest deadline, I had asked Monica to taste version 23 of the recipe during a Saturday session at my apartment. I had handed her the notebook so she could write her feedback directly beside my notes, the way I sometimes did with trusted colleagues. At the bottom of the page, in her own looping handwriting, she had written, "Needs more honey. The glaze could be richer." And then she had signed her name. Monica Hale. I stared at that signature for a long moment. She had written her name in my recipe notebook. On a page dated 6 months before the contest deadline. Giving feedback on a recipe she had just told national television was entirely hers. She had signed her own confession. And she had no idea it was sitting in my kitchen drawer. At work, I kept my behavior exactly the same as always. I showed up on time. I did my job. I joined the conversations about Monica's television appearance. I smiled at the right moments and said the right things. I didn't avoid her, and I didn't seek her out. I acted like a coworker who was happy for a friend's good news. But privately, I watched everything. Monica was receiving emails from food media outlets. 2 podcast producers had reached out about guest appearances. A grocery chain had contacted Douglas about potential product licensing tied to the biscuit recipe. She was building a career on something she didn't understand. That part became clearer every single day. When people at work asked Monica about her process, how she had developed the recipe, why she chose orange blossom honey specifically, what made her decide to add the second glaze layer, her answers were always slightly off. She spoke in general terms. She used vague language. She said things like, "It just felt right," or "I kept adjusting until it worked." Anyone who had actually developed a recipe from scratch would have had specific answers. Dates. Numbers. Particular memories. Monica had none of those things. Because she hadn't been there. I had. And the difference between us was becoming more visible every week. The moment that changed everything happened quietly, the way important moments often do. A senior buyer from a national grocery chain came to visit the Golden Table Kitchen's test kitchen about 6 weeks after the broadcast. His name was Warren Briggs, and Douglas had arranged the meeting specifically to discuss developing the honey butter sunrise biscuit into a commercial product. Monica was front and center, which made sense given her new public profile. She was confident walking in, answering questions about packaging and the target market without hesitation. Then Warren asked her to demonstrate the recipe. Just a simple walkthrough. No pressure. Just to give him a feel for the process. Monica moved to the prep table and reached toward the ingredients laid out on the counter. Her hand paused over the honey bottles. She stood still for just a second, scanning the row of jars. Then she turned to me. "Aaron, can you hand me the orange blossom honey?" She said it casually, like she was asking anyone in the room. But Warren looked at her. Then he looked at me. And I looked at him. Because orange blossom honey had never been mentioned publicly. Not in the television segment, not in any interview, not in any press material. The only people who knew that specific ingredient were the ones who had been inside the recipe from the very beginning. Warren Briggs knew something was wrong. And now, so did I, officially. 2 weeks after Warren Briggs's visit, the contest organizers released an announcement that changed the shape of everything. They were hosting a live cooking rematch episode, a special broadcast in which the contest winner would recreate their dish in front of a studio audience, answering questions from the host about technique and process. It was designed to celebrate the winning recipe and give the winner more national visibility. Monica was, of course, invited to appear. She told me about it during a quiet moment in the hallway between meetings. Her voice was lower than usual, and she didn't quite meet my eyes when she spoke. "I've been practicing," she said. "But the dough keeps coming out wrong. Something about the texture isn't matching what we made in your kitchen." I didn't correct her choice of words. "We." She looked at me then. "Could you help me practice?" she asked quietly. "Just to make sure I have it right before the broadcast." I let the silence sit for a moment. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the person who had eaten my food, memorized my story, stolen my name, and was now standing in a hallway asking me to help her perform it in front of millions of people. "Of course," I said. And I meant every single word. For 3 days before the live rematch, Monica practiced making the biscuit in the office test kitchen after hours. I stayed with her each evening. I watched her measure the ingredients. I watched her mix the dough. I watched her glaze the tops and time the bake. And every time something went wrong, which was often, she looked over at me with a helpless expression, waiting for direction. The dough came out too dense. The glaze was too thin. The timing was off by several minutes. Each time, I gave her a small, careful correction. I didn't hand her the full answer. I let her struggle a little, then offered just enough guidance to keep her from giving up entirely. And I documented all of it. I kept my phone propped near the mixing station on a low shelf, screen facing away from Monica, recording video during each session. I wrote down every question she asked me, the specific questions that a person who had actually created a recipe would never need to ask. How much orange blossom honey goes into the first layer? What temperature does the dough need to rest at? How do I know when the glaze is the right consistency? Every question was a crack in her story. And by the third evening, I had enough cracks to bring the whole wall down. On a quiet Thursday night, after Monica had gone home and the office building was mostly empty, I sat at my desk and composed an email to the National Morning Table Cooking Contest Committee. I kept my tone calm and professional throughout. I didn't accuse Monica of anything directly. I didn't use words like theft, or fraud, or anything else that could make me sound emotional or unstable. Instead, I introduced myself as a product developer at Golden Table Kitchens and explained that I had submitted a recipe to the contest earlier in the year under my own name, the Honey Butter Sunrise Biscuit, and that I believed there may have been a submission discrepancy worth reviewing. I attached 3 things. First, the digital files from my recipe folder, all 47 documents, each timestamped, showing the full development of the recipe over 3 years. Second, high-resolution scans of the relevant pages from my notebook, including the page with Monica's handwriting and her signature, dated 6 months before the contest deadline. Third, a written timeline of every tasting session and conversation I could document, with dates and brief descriptions alongside each entry. I reread the email 4 times before I sent it. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and walked out into the cool evening air. The truth was moving now. All I had to do was wait. 3 days passed. I went to work. I answered emails. I attended a development meeting about a new soup line. I ate lunch with Perry from production, who wanted to talk about whether oat flour could replace all-purpose in our current biscuit formulas. I didn't tell anyone about the email I had sent. Not Douglas. Not Perry. Not a single person. On the 4th morning, my phone rang while I was sitting in my car in the parking garage before my shift. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. I answered on the second ring. Ms. Calloway? The voice on the other end was male, measured, and careful in the way that told me he had rehearsed this call before making it. This is Martin Ford. I'm a producer with the National Morning Table Cooking Contest. Yes, I said. We received your email, he said. I want to thank you for sending it. We've been doing some internal verification over the last few days, and I have a few questions I need to ask you directly. He paused. Can you confirm for me when you first developed the honey butter sunrise biscuit recipe? And can you walk me through your original submission process? I leaned back in my seat and looked out through the windshield at the concrete wall ahead of me. Yes, I said. I can confirm everything. And I smiled for the first time in weeks. Martin Ford's next words were not what I expected. He told me that when the committee pulled the submission records and compared them side by side, they found 2 entries for the exact same recipe. Mine and Monica's. The ingredients matched. The technique matched. The glaze method matched. Even the personal origin story, the accidental honey, the smell that stopped the kitchen, matched almost word for word. The difference between the 2 submissions was 12 minutes. Mine had arrived first. Monica had submitted her version 12 minutes after mine, which meant she had somehow accessed my submission before the deadline closed. Martin believed she had read my draft during the evening she spent at my apartment the night before the deadline, photographing it or memorizing the key details while I was in another room. She hadn't even rewritten it in any meaningful way. She had simply attached a polished personal video of herself talking about the recipe, which had made her entry stand out in the first review round, while mine had been passed over in the large volume of submissions that came in that same night. The committee had been drawn to the presentation, not the recipe itself. And in doing so, they had selected the wrong person entirely. Martin's voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. "We are taking this very seriously," he said. Martin told me the committee was furious. The way he described it, the discovery had triggered an emergency internal meeting the same day the records were pulled. Several members wanted to handle the situation privately, contact Monica directly, ask her to step down quietly, and release a careful correction without drawing public attention to what had happened. But others on the committee felt that approach wasn't enough. Monica had appeared on national television. She had claimed a recipe that wasn't hers in front of a studio audience and millions of viewers at home. A quiet correction sent to a press list wouldn't undo that. It wouldn't reach the people who had already seen the broadcast and walked away believing the story she had told. There was also another complication. The live rematch episode was already scheduled and well into production. Promotional material had been released. Tickets had been distributed to a studio audience of over 400 people. 3 national food publications had confirmed they would be covering the event. It was too far along to quietly disappear. Which meant the committee had a decision to make about how the truth was going to come out, and in what setting. Martin asked me to hold on. I heard him speaking with someone in the background, their voices low and deliberate. When he came back, his tone had shifted. "We'd like to offer you 2 options," he said. "And we'd like your decision by tomorrow morning." Martin laid out both choices clearly. The first was a private resolution. Monica would be contacted by the committee, shown the evidence, and asked to formally withdraw from the rematch episode. A public statement would be released acknowledging that the recipe had been incorrectly attributed, and my name would be listed as the original creator in all future materials. No live confrontation. No broadcast involvement. The second option was different. The rematch episode would go forward as scheduled, but with one change. I would be added to the program as a surprise second guest. Monica would be invited to demonstrate the recipe live, as originally planned. And at a specific moment during the broadcast, the producers would present the verified development timeline on screen and give Monica the opportunity to explain what the audience was seeing. If she couldn't, or wouldn't, the truth would be visible to the same national audience that had watched her claim the recipe in the first place. Martin was careful to say that the second option carried real risk. Monica might perform unexpectedly well under pressure. Things might not unfold cleanly on live television. But the first option meant that most of the people who had seen Monica's original interview would never know what had actually happened. I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "Liv," I said. "I want the rematch." Martin was quiet for just a moment. "Then we'll be in touch very soon," he said. The night before the broadcast, Monica practiced in the office test kitchen one final time. I was there, as I had been every other evening. I stood near the prep table with my arms loosely crossed, watching her work through the steps with the kind of concentrated urgency that told me she was more nervous than she was letting on. The dough was giving her trouble again. She kept pressing it too firmly, which made it tough and dense instead of light and layered. The glaze was separating unevenly at the edges. She pulled the first batch out of the oven and stared at the pan with an expression I recognized well, frustration mixing with the beginning of panic. "It's still not right," she muttered, almost to herself. "The texture is wrong every single time." She had no idea why, because she had never understood the technique from the inside. She had watched me make this biscuit dozens of times over 3 years, but watching someone do something and truly knowing how to do it yourself are completely different things. I gave her one final small correction. Told her the dough needed less handling. She nodded and started again. The second batch came out better, not perfect, but close enough that she seemed to breathe again. She thanked me when she left that night. I told her good luck. And I meant it in a way she didn't understand yet. Because tomorrow, she was going to need it. The television studio was much larger than I had expected. I arrived 2 hours before the broadcast, brought in through a side entrance by a producer named Allison who walked me through the plan step by step. I would stay backstage until a specific moment in the show. My name would not appear on any promotional materials. Monica would not know I was there until the host introduced me on air. I stood behind the curtain and watched on a monitor as Monica was escorted to the main cooking station. She looked composed under the lights. She smiled at the studio audience and adjusted her apron with practiced ease. She answered the host's early questions smoothly, general questions about her love of cooking, what the contest had meant to her, how the public response had felt. Then the host paused. Before we get to the demonstration, she said, we actually have a surprise for our audience today. Monica tilted her head slightly, offering a polite smile, as if she was expecting a fun segment twist. We'd like to welcome a very special guest, the host continued. Someone with a unique connection to today's recipe. Please welcome, Erin Calloway. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The studio lights hit me all at once. And Monica's face went completely white. The audience murmured with interest as I walked to the second cooking station. Monica's expression had locked into something careful, a practiced attempt at composure that wasn't quite working. Her smile was still there, but her eyes had gone flat and her jaw was tight in a way the studio lights made very easy to see. The host spoke calmly. We've spent the past week doing a significant amount of verification, she said. And we want to share what we found with our audience today. A large screen behind us lit up. It showed a split timeline, my recipe development files on the left side, dated back 3 years and 2 months, and Monica's contest submission on the right. Then my submission timestamp appeared. Then Monica's, 12 minutes later. Then the notebook page appeared on screen. Monica's handwriting. Monica's signature. Dated 6 months before the contest deadline, giving feedback on a recipe she had just told national television was entirely hers. The audience went very quiet. The host turned to Monica gently. Monica, she said, would you like to explain the timeline we've just shown? Monica opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in all the weeks since that television broadcast had turned my life upside down, Monica Hale had absolutely nothing to say. No explanation. No story. No version of events she could offer. Just silence, under studio lights, in front of everyone. The broadcast ended early. The host wrapped the segment professionally, thanking the audience and directing viewers to the Morning America Kitchen website where a full statement would be published. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. It ended the way truth usually ends things, quietly and completely. By the time I left the studio, my phone had already started filling with messages. Former coworkers. Industry contacts. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them had seen the broadcast or heard about it within minutes of it ending. The contest committee formally revoked Monica's title that afternoon and released a public statement acknowledging that the honey butter sunrise biscuit had been incorrectly attributed and that the true creator was Erin Calloway. Golden Table Kitchens launched an internal investigation the same week. I wasn't part of the process directly, but Douglas told me quietly that the findings were serious and that the company intended to handle it accordingly. Monica resigned before the investigation concluded. I didn't call her. I didn't send a message. There was nothing left for me to say that hadn't already been said by the evidence. She hadn't lost everything because I had screamed or fought or made a scene. She had lost everything because the truth had been documented, protected, and patient. And eventually, inevitably, the truth had spoken for itself. 2 months after the broadcast, I stood in the same television studio again. But everything about it felt different this time. This time my name was on the call sheet. This time the producers had reached out to me, not to investigate something, but to celebrate something. This time there was no curtain to stand behind and no surprise entrance to plan. The host welcomed me by name, and the audience applauded before I had even said a word. I demonstrated the honey butter sunrise biscuit from start to finish, the way I had done it countless times in my own kitchen and my own test kitchen over 3 long years. I explained the accidental orange blossom honey. I talked about the 60 pages of notes and the dozens of failed batches. I talked about the Saturday mornings I had spent alone in the test kitchen, adjusting the glaze a little more each time until it was exactly right. When the biscuits came out of the oven, the smell filled the entire studio. The audience tasted them and applauded. And I stood there under those lights and let it happen. Not because I had fought the hardest or been the loudest, but because I had been careful, honest, and patient when it would have been so easy to fall apart. That morning I understood something I want to carry with me for the rest of my life. People can take your work, but they cannot take the years it cost you to become the person who created it. And eventually, those years always find a way to speak. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share this video. And I'm curious, what would you have done in this situation? Would you have handled it the same way like I did? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to stay tuned for more stories like this.